Hey guys, Spot here. You know that, TV show or especially book series that you saw as a kid and were obsessed with, and it became like a core part of your personality? But when you try to explain it to people, it feels like you're explaining a fever dream, and you're pretty sure nobody knows what you're talking about. I have a few of those, and I want to talk about one of them today. This is the W.I.T.C.H series, W.I.T.C.H. Not woman in total control of herself. These characters definitely are not. They are disasters. It aired at about the same time as Avatar: The Last Airbender, if I remember correctly. And you know what? I should actually look that up to make sure that I am saying correct things. Update. Yep, they were airing at around the same time. The first episode of which aired on December 18th, 2004. And Avatar: The Last Airbender started February 21st, 2005. So they were airing at about the same time, which is interesting because they both have a lot to do with the four elements, but they have very different tones. I wonder what the whole four element thing was back then. In the early 2000s was also when the series that shall not be named was starting to become popular, which have four houses which loosely correspond to the four elements. There's something there, but the threads are not connecting quite yet, and I'm not a historian. Well, I'm not sure if the TV show was actually my first exposure to which, or if it was the books, which apparently are novelizations of the original graphic novels, which I had no idea existed other than the comic panel inserts that I thought were just a fun bonus thing. And they are, but they're inserts from a full graphic novel that I didn't even know existed until I started really looking into this series. And I'll be honest, this series grabbed me more than Avatar did. I think The Last Airbender, I had this really bad luck when it came to different children's media. If there was a scary monster, I happened to walk in right at the time when the scary monster was the only thing on screen. So I didn't get into the series that shall not be named for a while because the first thing I saw of it was Fluffy just lunging at the protagonist, and that was the only image I associate with Harry Potter, and I'm like, no, hell no, no, stay away from that. And same thing with Avatar: Last Airbender. I believe it was a Face Stealer episode was my first exposure to the series. And I was like, nope, not a series for me. Which is a shame because I think I would have loved the whole series if I had time to sit down and watch it. I also went through a lot of periods of time where I had cable, and then I didn't have cable, and then I had cable again. So it was hard to keep up with more serialized stuff. And which is kind of serialized, but not quite to the extent that Avatar is. Which does have kind of scary monsters, which sound exactly the same, and I hate it so much. This is gonna cause so many problems. The show, which does kind of have monsters and stuff, but at least to my child brain, they were not as scary as the monsters in Last Airbender or the series that shall not be named, which I think is why it drew me in more than the other. Also, I'm trying to figure out how this new microphone works, and let me tell you, it is very unsettling to talk and hear your voice both inside your head and outside your head from headphones at the same time. So with my 27th birthday having just passed, repressing that, and with me feeling a little bit more nostalgic, and also having watched Quentin reviews and Kia and Carlisle's videos and like a bunch of other video essayists putting out these awesome like multi-hour documentaries basically on these weird TV shows and taking them way too seriously. I thought it would be a lot of fun to talk about series that meant a lot to me as a kid and revisit them, maybe see how my personality came to be and like if they hold up at all. Just I think it'd be fun. And if you think it'd be fun, then you can join along. And because I'm a very impatient person when it comes to editing long form stuff, I think I'm just gonna put out a video per book, and then I'm going to splice the whole thing together, add some other little tangents as they come up, and then at the end of it, it'll be a whole thing, but in the meantime, there will be individual little breakdowns of each book. Just so that I'm not driving myself crazy, making something, spending hours, weeks on it, and then nobody sees it, so people think I'm just sitting there doing nothing, and that frustrates me. Which is something I should tell a therapist and not the internet, but here we are. So before I ramble on for like 6 hours about nothing, let's get into book 1, which is, again, this book series that I have is the novelization of the graphic novel. So every book has a prologue and epilogue, basically, which are a few pages from the graphic novel. This prologue briefly introduces a location that will become semi-important in the series, Kandrakar, where the Oracle, who is basically the exposition guy, introduces our basic premise. 5 magical girls with the powers of the 4 elements, with Will's element being left unsaid. I think there's like a couple vague explanations of it later on, but she's basically kind of like the linchpin of the whole group. I think it's supposed to be like heart or aether or something. But the basics are 4 elements plus the 5th catalyst element, which is Will's. We cut to Will waking up from a prophetic nightmare, or it could be a stress dream because she's a young teen moving to a new city with her mom. It's miserable and rainy, but her mom tries to keep a positive attitude, and just instantly I love their dynamic because it's obvious Will has been through some shit, and so has her mom. They've both been through something like really difficult together, and it's affected them, and they deal with it in different ways, and that causes friction, but they clearly still love each other deeply. I love it, and it's also single parent representation, which is sometimes hard to find in kids media. So Will and her mom are just instantly relatable to me because I moved around a lot as a kid, and so I was constantly the new kid, especially in elementary school, so that's a very familiar feeling to me. The five girls all have kind of different social classes. They have a whole spectrum, with Will being somewhere on the lower end of it, which made her very relatable to me. Ronnie is another character who is very relatable for a similar reason. She's also a new kid in class, new kid in school, and chapter 1 starts with actually her point of view, as she is already going to be late for history class, and from the way it's narrated, she basically just arrived at school, which confused me endlessly as a kid and now. Like, do they not have a homeroom? Well, this is apparently an Italian series, was an Italian series first before American publishers picked it up. So I don't know if homerooms just aren't a thing in Italian schools, but in US schools, they're basically a requirement. It's basically just it's not even always a full class period, but it's like a 30 minutes in the beginning of each school day, where kids kind of collect themselves and make sure their homework is done, do little errands, gives the teachers time to do errands and listen to announcements and pass out paperwork like permission slips, or like, this is probably not a thing anymore because so much is online, but in the early 2000s, you always got, at the beginning of every month, a little sheet of paper that had the whole month printed out with all the school events on it. And you take that home for your parents, and they put it up on the fridge and mark off like what's going on. And you sometimes write due dates for projects and stuff. And that's what homeroom was for, basically. So the fact that this school just drops you right into class with no homeroom is very jarring. One thing I noticed is, among Tarani's many worries, is that her homemade school lunch could smell bad and her peers would not want her to sit with them, which I know from cultural osmosis is something a lot of cultural minorities struggle with. I've never cared about what a fellow student's lunch smelled like, and I am not from a cultural minority, so I don't know how common that is, but I do know it's a common trope for cultural minorities, and I think there is a lot of truth to it from what I've heard. The writing in this book series is not the best, but what they really do nail is character emotion and character relationships and dialogue and like small details that paint a bigger picture, which I think is the benefit of like having the graphic novel to refer to, because the graphic novel is obviously a visual medium, so it's kind of like taking what the panels kind of show and translating that into text. I find it very interesting, and also that kind of writing style, the almost no nonsense, like sparing with the details, but using details that paint a bigger picture. That's something I learned from this book series, and I can see it very clearly, and especially my early writing, which is very similar to the writing style of these books. So that's very neat. Although I did pick up some bad habits, like stilted dialogue and a little bit of underwriting and awkward pacing. These books aren't perfectly written, but they are, for what they are, really good. At least to my nostalgic rose-colored view. Another thing that I noticed right away is how much attention they bring to just how early in puberty these girls are. They're around like 13-ish. And they constantly worry about their flat chest and stuff, and they focus a lot on the physicality of other people. At first I was like, oh, that's exaggerated. There's no way middle schoolers really think about bodies that much. And then I remembered when I was at a sleepover with a friend and she brought out her puberty book that her mom gave her, and we kind of spent a good portion of that night looking through the pictures and giggling and comparing our chests to each other's and to the pictures. So, and that was just one memory. Who knows what else I did that I don't remember? Wow, that sounded bad. I swear I had a very boring life in middle school, but probably that did happen more often in middle school than I remember. Of just the constant like comparing of bodies and worrying about your own body. Because puberty is a very scary and confusing time, and your relationship to your body changes almost on a daily basis. Spoiler alert to any younger people who may be viewing this. Your late 20s and into your 30s is also a time when your relationship to your body changes a lot. Because you start aging. Yay! They spend like a significant portion of time making fun of the principal, Miss Knickerbocker, because she just has huge dope on honkeros. Like, absolutely huge badonkers. And a dump truck. Like, the sound of her cheeks clapping alerts the I have in my notes here that there is a problem that I picked up in my own writing, unfortunately. Fortunately, I've stopped, but unfortunately, when I was a kid, I had a huge problem with this. Not using italics properly in the right places. Because when a character is having direct internal thoughts, you should be using italics. So it's one thing if it's like, Tarani was so worried that she was going to be late to class. It's another thing to be like, Tarani raced down the hallway. Oh crap, I'm gonna be so late for class. In that latter example, you should use italics, because otherwise it makes it look like it switches from third person to first person, and especially if it's a longer thought, it can take your reader out of the story. It took me out of the story a couple times. Despite some issues like fat shaming and stuff, character descriptions are very punchy and vivid, and They're described in a way that you just instantly get a visual of the girls and their basic personalities. Kind of the way you would get that from the comics, because the graphic novel, the art style is very expressive and colorful, and there's often like quite a lot of details going on the page. And it can say a lot with just one or two panels. And it's really interesting that the writing style actually captures this. Also, unfortunate implications of reading this as an adult. The history teacher is described as sadistic and okay, another tip for writers. If your character is an adult man, please don't describe him as leering over children with vampire-like glee. I know that nothing probably was meant by that, but it was still very uncomfortable to read as an adult. Also, the fact that he's paying special attention to Irma in particular, who, by the way, is in Tarani's class along with Haylin. I don't like that Irma's constantly described as the early bloomer, especially when she's getting the most attention from a male teacher. And I know that that's mostly because she's the class clown slash slacker. But again, the juxtaposition of those two is very uncomfortable. So we meet Irma and Haylin. Okay, so I should probably explain some of the character personalities. Will is kind of tomboyish and introverted, a little bit emo, honestly. Then there's Tarani, who is friendly but very timid. Then there's Irma, again, is a kind of class clown slash slacker, very bubbly. And then there's Haylin, who's bubbly in a very different, very queer way. Literally, in every sense of the word, she is queer. Like, she makes her own outfits, she puts things together and doesn't care if they clash, always wearing goggles. If this girl doesn't realize in her, 20s that she is a lesbian, I will eat my hat. Although there is an inherent homoeroticism in any magical girl series. You cannot change my mind. To the point I was trying to get to, we start getting clues that something is not quite normal if you didn't read the prologue and see that, the Oracle telling the story of the girls and stuff. If that didn't give it away, the fact that there's magic in this world, or possibly. So, her and Haylin are kind of freaking out about a surprise pop quiz. They get into a little scuffle, and Irma ends up being volunteered to answer the quiz question, but she didn't study the night before, so out of desperation, she does what Haylin describes as her spell. She pleads under her breath for the teacher to ask her about Charles the Great, the one thing she did study for, and it works. I tried this more times than I want to admit when I was in middle school. The more I read this series, the more I realize that it basically shaped my entire personality. Tarani dismisses the idea of magic as impossible. This is a literary device called irony. Although, side note, I don't think this power or anything like it ever comes up again. I could be wrong, but I mean, the girls don't seem able to charm people or influence their actions. They mostly just develop elemental-based powers later on. This might have just been a sheer coincidence, or the teacher just heard her whispering under her breath and decided to humor her. So, I don't know, it's a very confusing thing. Maybe the nature of their powers also changes with certain milestones, such as, actually unlocking the Heart of Kanjikar changes the nature of their powers, and then I guess some stuff happens later on, so it could be that. Anyway, in chapter 2, we get Cornelia's perspective, as she has been struggling to pay attention in physics class. After briefly complaining about how her hair is too silky and too straight, Cornelia is kind of depressed. She's very, fashion-minded, and ironically, I think she's a bit of a germaphobe if I remember correctly, but she definitely cares a lot about her looks, which is a really nice change of pace for the Earth Elemental. Which also, Tarani's timid and a little bit afraid of fire, and she's the fire element. So I like that those two have like opposite personalities to their elements. So anyway, she realizes that she's been doing it again. It being its seeming ability to manipulate her environment. So she does this while her classmate and recurring character Martin Tubbs is like presenting an essay, and she makes the comment, "Leave it to four-eyed Martin to find something obscure and analyze it to death." So Martin Tubbs grows up to become a YouTuber who makes 6-hour essays of obscure children's series, doesn't he? So Cornelia also has a spell. So basically, she can kind of manipulate her environment. She wishes it was dark so she could go home and the lights go out. So school closes for the day and she makes her way through the crowd and she informs the audience of the concept of infielders and outfielders, which are the popular and the unpopular kids. And then there are the snuffle-up-a-guy, which are invisible to all. This kind of felt contrived to me even as a kid. So while there was some sort of social hierarchy in middle school, it wasn't very stratified, more like a complex web of cliques. Again, there was a little bit of a hierarchy, like there were some people that like everybody kind of agreed like, man, this kid's really, this group of girls are just really hot and like rich, so we all want to be their friends kind of thing. Beyond that, everybody just kind of had their own little clubs. There was not a strict, like, this is this group and this is... The idea of, like, those strict social hierarchies in schools always seemed kind of weird to me. And then there's things like, you know, there's the football kids, but some of the football kids also do, like, theater, so they're also theater kids. Or, like, the kid in the chess club also is a cheerleader or something. So kids do multiple extracurriculars, so you can't even separate them by school club. The social dynamics of middle school and high school are just a lot messier than media gives them credit for. Generally, popularity ends up being the people who do a lot of extracurriculars because they just have their foot in the door with more clicks. Or again, if you're rich, because when you're rich, everything just falls into your lap. So it turns out Cornelia, Irma, and Helen all kind of know each other, so they're chatting, and Irma and Helen tell her about the remote control quiz thing, and Cornelia is like, oh, that's cute, but nothing compared to my powers. And then she sees a boy who she thinks that looks very similar to the boy that she saw outside the window in the leaves. And she's like, nah, that's not true. I didn't see any mystery boy in the leaves. That's crazy. Which, like, girl, you think you have magic powers that can control the environment, and seeing a face in the leaves is a step too far. So, Irma points out Tarani to Cornelia, and we find out that Will is in Cornelia's class along with Cornelia's best friend, Elion. Elion will be important later, because you can't have a name like that and not be a fantasy protagonist. It's weird because the girls are a protagonist, but Elion actually has, like, kind of the closest ties to the magical world, which we'll see later. So she, like, it feels like she should be the protagonist of the series. It's like she's the protagonist of her own thing, and then the girls are, it's like there's simultaneously two stories going on with two different protagonists. The structure of this story is kind of weird, but I love it. So anyway, Elion is acting all timid, and we soon find out why. She got a bad grade in math, which means that the group must now punish her. Damn, girls are just savage. I don't know if this is realistic to middle schoolers, but it just strikes me as realistic, considering what I dealt with in middle school. So Elion is playing along until Cornelia decides that her punishment will involve her crush Mac. Then she tries to back out of it, but is dragged along. So her punishment is, she has to beg him to study with her. Cornelia reflects on how much fun her friends are, and how sad she is that the trees are losing their leaves. How they must feel so cold and vulnerable. Which shows that she has a lot more empathy than her reserved, icy demeanor shows. I was always a little scared of Cornelia, in the show at least, because the show does not really show her empathy quite as much. I think it's more focused on the action, if I remember correctly. It doesn't have the little character moments like this. It doesn't show the interiority of the characters as well as the books do. But Cornelia always low-key scared me as a kid. So Cornelia is shaken out of yet another reverie by a scream over by the bike rack. She races over to see Will and Tarani being harassed by the school bullies Kurt, Laurent, and Nigel, led by Uriah. So you know they're bad dudes because they're the only ones described as having acne so far. So Cornelia sees these boys harassing the new girls, and she does not care about them. She's like, they're just a bunch of losers. Nobody likes them. But she knows that they can be very intimidating to the new girls, especially the timid little Tarani. So, again, she is very empathetic. She just doesn't like to show it. So, the boys have somehow tied their bikes into a pretzel? I'm not sure how this is physically possible. Well, Tarani is actually taking no crap. She snaps at the bullies while Will works on untangling the bikes. So Tarani is not completely just a little, shy, shrinking violet. She does have a bit of attitude to her, which is nice. I like when characters are multifaceted. Cornelia notices that Nigel, the only member of the group with basic hygiene, seems kind of reluctant to be there. He will also be important later. When the boys change tactics and start crossing the line into sexual harassment, Cornelia steps in and scares them off. She says that not everyone is as dickish as they are, and tells them about the Halloween party happening that night. This has the opposite intended effect and just makes the girls panic more. They rush home to get ready. Cornelia takes note of their less than fashionable appearance, but isn't too bothered by it. She thinks they could be cool once they get past the new kid awkwardness, so she goes home in a good mood. Chapter 3 follows a stereotypical bully gang. Like most bullies, they aren't really well liked by their peers, as is evidenced by them not being infielders. Because, being a jerk doesn't make people want to hang out with you unless they are also jerks. So Uriah details his plan to put fireworks in the giant paper-mache pumpkin at the party. Meanwhile, his gang commences their usual after-school activities, which include terrorizing, slouching, and eating junk food. I too have a hard time writing believable jerk and bully characters, but generally people do have hobbies, regardless of how mean they are. We do get a clear idea of Uriah as a person, though, mainly that what he wants is power and control, especially at the expense of the infielders, who he feels like has just screwed him over. Chapter 4 follows Irma, who is chilling in her bathtub. Her favorite place is the beach, but the bath is a close second. We also get the details that Cornelia has a high-rise apartment and Haylin lives above her family's Chinese restaurant. Irma thinks both places are really cool compared to her salt box house, which I had to look up. It's a traditional New England style house that got its name from its resemblance to old boxes where salt used to be stored. Okay, so Irma collects bubble bath soaps and seashells and stacks them on every available surface in her bathroom. Big mood. And she sometimes lets her pet turtle Leafy hang out on the tub rim, but I don't think it's very responsible of Irma to put him on the tub rim. But everything turns out fine. She soaks for 2 hours every night before going to bed, which is unimaginable to me. I usually get antsy about 30 minutes in. Haylin's room is described as a messy assortment of comic books, paintbrushes, rollerblades, etc. Girl after my own heart. I love how all these girls are just messy. Because it's very, I have never seen a teenager with a clean room. Also, Haylin has a window seat, so she officially has the best room. All these girls have such cool, fun rooms. While Irma is dreading having to find something presentable in her closet, Haylin is already making her own dress. So while Irma is talking on the phone with Haylin, we briefly meet Haylin's very sweet grandma before Irma goes back to testing her developing water magic in the tub. So she's making water into little snakes that dance around. About 2 months ago, she started being able to control water and her powers have been growing ever since. So we can assume that this 2-month timeline is true of the other girls as well, because there's no evidence that would not be simultaneous, and that makes my life easier. Unfortunately, the peaceful bath time is ruined by her strict police sergeant father yelling at her to hurry up. Her magic misfires, and she ends up drenching the bathroom in water. She is instantly panicked and begging the water to evaporate. She also wishes she had a dad who wasn't a cop, but I guess Irma still loves him. He doesn't stay mad at her for long. He makes a joke about how her hands aren't pruny and how he's jealous of that. And Irma remembers sometimes holding his hand on beach walks, but only when the popular kids aren't looking. She's not happy with the yellow color of her favorite dress and wishes it was navy blue instead. Suddenly, her entire wardrobe becomes navy blue. She remarks that she should be careful what she wishes for. Chapter 5 starts with Will moping about how exhausting the day was and wondering if she should go to the party or help her mom set up the internet in their new apartment, which she instantly says is a lame thing to do. Troy says if Will isn't going, then she won't go either. Will knew she should fight to fit in a header field the same way that she fought to beat the clock at swimming practice or fought to get along with her mom, even when her mom was driving her crazy. In her old life at Van Hills, she had gotten used to going into hiding. She and her mom both had. Will's parents were divorced, but her dad would not leave them alone. They had to move and get an unlisted phone number to get away from him. And the reason that they moved here was because of the 24-hour security guard in the apartment complex. So basically, Will's dad is a stalker. That's surprisingly heavy, and this is like book 1. This is just character backstory. Unfortunately, the consequence of changing her phone number and moving is that she lost contact with all of her old friends, which she blames herself for because during her parents' messy divorce, she got more withdrawn. But Will, let me tell you, those are not real friends. Like, oh my god, if I disappear from my friends for too long, they will immediately start asking me what's up. And we've been that way since high school. So, real people are out there. If a friend is starting to be more down and withdrawn and the whole friend group is yeah, never mind, that's not a solid friend group. Those are fair weather friends. So Will calls her mom on her own cell phone, which was a rarity in the early 2000s. I guess it was a benefit from her mom's job or something. Her mom is also a workaholic, so she describes the phone as a second mother. There's a lot to unpack here. Despite this, Will's mom is instantly happy for her daughter and excited to hear about her day. She encourages Will to go to the party and insists on driving her, completely talks over Will, who is trying to explain her very real anxieties. Will plays off her disappointed reaction to Tarani by making a funny face and feels better that she was able to make her new friend laugh. Then it starts raining and she's back to sulking. She seems determined to find an excuse to be miserable. But they decide to shelter at Tarani's house. So Tarani's house is shiny white and modern. So she is actually closer to Cornelia than Will or Haylin income-wise, which is not what I first thought. When I was a kid, I always imagined she lived in a big surf shack because of her brother, who is obsessed with surfing. So, Will is not super comfortable wearing a dress, and she wishes that she could wear sweatpants instead, but she can't find any store that sells them. Just, quote, sleeveless nothings. So she glances in a store window and sees her reflection. But it's different. More grown up, more confident, more put together. With her stripy purple magical girl uniform that shows much more skin than Will could ever imagine doing in her current body. She realizes that she stopped in front of Ye Old Bookshop, which will be an important location later. She shakes herself out of her transfixed state and bikes home. Chapter 6 starts with Cornelia in an argument with her mom, who doesn't want her going anywhere until she cleans her room. Her room is a mess of homework, clothes, plushies, ice skates, and trophies. Cornelia and her mom are way too alike for their own good, which adds to the frustration for both of them. And to make matters worse, her 6-year-old little sister shows up and wants to hang out with her since she will definitely be grounded. Suddenly, Cornelia is locked out of her own room and it magically cleans itself. She floats off to the party to the bemusement of her parents. Short and sweet. I also tried to do this an embarrassing amount of times as a kid. Sometimes I still do this as an adult. Chapter 7 starts with Will in her boxed-up room with its scattered frog collection and old-fashioned phone. Homesick, she drifts off and wakes up late to the party. She rushes to get ready, lamenting how undeveloped her body is. She once again sees a weird reflection and worries for a second that her mom will come in and see her like that. But of course, she hasn't actually transformed, and her very concerned mom tells her to wear the black dress. Will laments that she looks so flat, and her mom tells her that she is a special girl and she needs to learn to love herself. Will tries smiling at herself in the mirror, and it helps a little bit. Pick up Tarani, who is just happy to be there, and Will's mom tells Tarani to put a little fire in Will. Will is relieved that Tarani doesn't tease her for having an affectionate mom. Tarani is dressed in a crazy outfit. Aviator cap, goggles, zebra coat, pink dress. They run into Cornelia, who is wearing basically her magical girl uniform, and she cheerfully informs them that they were fashionably late. Chapter 8 opens on Irma fuming that her friends didn't believe her when she told them about the wardrobe mishap. Aylin is dressed as a geisha, which is a choice. We learn that the band playing Cobalt Blue is frontlined by Elion's crush, Matt. Elion is dressed like a fairy or something with a feathery green tunic and a crown of leaves. This is called irony. Will, Tarani, and Cornelia show up, and Will is the only one who believes Irma when she talks about the whole incident. Meanwhile, Martin Tubbs, who has a crush on Irma and is dressed in a highly impractical mummy costume, shows up. Despite her annoyance, Irma's friends encourage her to get a group photo using his Polaroid. A new cute boy shows up in a strange outfit. Nobody knows who he is, but Elion is instantly drawn in. Her friends decide that her new punishment is to ask that boy for math help, which she does not object to. Now, the boy in question looks like this. How is he mistaken for a teenager? Meanwhile, Will is in a trance, only briefly snapping out of it when a blue-clad partygoer is jostled. He asks the group if anyone else hears a humming sound and then nearly faints. Meanwhile, this large blue guy has been following them and is getting really pushy. So the gang head outside for some air. And I forgot to mention that Irma had told Martin to disappear, and he seems to have literally disappeared. I'm sure that's nothing. Chapter 9 switches gears to follow the Oracle. We learn that his job is to see all and know all. He's kind of the Professor X of the story. He is guarded by his loyal sentinel, Tibor, as he watches the girls, who are the new guardians of the Veil that separates the exiled evil of Metamor from the good of Earth. Yeah, because Earth is the good place. You can tell this was written before 2020. The Veil is rapidly thinning, and the girls are urgently needed. The thinning veil is also what has been causing the weird storms. He shows Tibor the Polaroid somehow, and they look past it somehow, and see Lord Cedric just beyond the frame somehow, accompanied by V.I.T.C.H. He watches Ilion approach Cedric and reads her thoughts. He's so cute, he couldn't possibly be interested in someone as minor as me, but what do I have to lose? That was a little loud, I'm sorry, neighbors. This just makes me deeply uncomfortable. You can feel the negative energy as Ilion and Cedric interact. Also, we find out that Martin has been temporarily vanished from existence. Okay, fine, cool. Also, we learned that Will's fainting spell was caused by V.I.T.C.H's weaponized toxic vibes. As the Oracle zeroes in on Will, he can feel her pain. As V.I.T.C.H tries to pursue the girls, he runs into the invisible and suddenly visible Martin, who chastises him for being clumsy and then compliments his costume, taking a photo and blinding the creature of darkness with the camera flash. V.I.T.C.H is then dragged onto stage by the principal, who declares him winner of the costume contest. The Oracle says that all 5 Guardians are together. Tibor expresses confusion because he sees 6. The Oracle replies ominously that one will betray them. I wonder who. Maybe the one who's not on the cover. Chapter 10 is from Tarani's point of view as a reluctant V.I.T.C.H smacks aside the principal, inadvertently lighting the jack-o'-lantern on fire. Before they can unmask V.I.T.C.H, the jack-o'-lantern explodes with fireworks. Throughout the party, the girls have been getting bad vibes from this jack-o'-lantern. Now they know this is only the beginning, I guess. Vathek rushes at Will, but a firework hits him in the ass. Another heads for Irma, but redirects it. The stunned Will is almost caught in his second explosion until Tarani once again redirects it. The confused girls all regroup. Tarani is instantly the MVP of this whole party. Chapter 11 happens the next day. We follow Elion. We learn that she has been at the school since kindergarten, which answers some questions I had. I thought it was like a 6th to 8th grade middle school type situation. I guess it's a K-12? Now I'm kind of picturing it as a larger, almost like college campus with multiple buildings for the different grades and different subjects, I guess. She was inside the gym when the whole thing happened. She knows full well things could have been a lot worse, so she's reflecting on that, reflecting on how Sheffield is more her second home than she realized, and almost losing it made her appreciate it more. She also reveals that her relationship with her parents is distant. Somehow, Uriah and the gang only got 2 weeks detention after almost killing almost the whole school. Really should be a felony. They should be seeing jail time. I know they're minors, but like, I feel like they should be getting more than just having to clean up the mess. Like, this is some serious property damage at the very least. They got off way too easy. Leon zones back in time for the audience to get word that Irma and Cornelia are talking about a shared dream between Irma and Haylin, where they saw demons inside the jack-o'-lantern. They also see the crystals that will grant them their powers, though they don't know it yet. Haylin draws it, and Will recognizes it from her own dream. Ronnie and Will are terrified, Cornelia is frustrated and not understanding, and Haylin is excited. This pisses off Elion, who says it's typical of a girl who is still more interested in comic books than boys, which is a very interesting and very telling statement for both of them. When the girls talk about meeting up, Elion reveals that she has a bookstore date with Cedric. Irma teases Elion, who gets defensive before she realizes it was just teasing. The girls are genuinely happy for her. I genuinely just love how genuinely supportive these girls are. Like, it really feels like a solid friend group. And Elion says she would have started skipping if she was like 11, but she was a teenager now and on a date. Okay, so 13-year-olds aren't children, yeah, right. So she shows up to her date with Cedric, which is totally great and not problematic. Okay, I say that. It's not like the book is endorsing this. Like, he's clearly a villain and you're meant to think, oh shit. It's just even more uncomfortable to read as an adult than as a kid. In chapter 11, the girls have met up in Haylin's apartment. Haylin reflects that it makes sense that she would be the only one not terrified. She's the group's comic relief. She reflects on how she sees every day as an adventure, how she's very close with her grandma, who tells her lots of fairy tales, how her room is filled with anchors in her art supplies and comic books, how she doesn't see anything interesting about boys. She especially points out their knobby knees, sunken chests, gross eating habits, etc. But she's not worried. She says it's no biggie and she knows her hormones are gearing up, but things are fine as they are right now. Interesting. Cornelia insists that magic doesn't exist. Durrani asks her what all this is then, and Irma says growing pains. Yeah, that's totally what growing pains are. Then Haylin's grandmother enters with the heart of Kanjakar, which is the medallion that they dreamed of. Her change in demeanor is what scares Haylin. She tells one of her stories, but this time Haylin knows it's real. And it's kind of a, like, I don't want to recount the whole story because I'm already summarizing, like, going through so much of this book story. This is already such a long video. The girls are obviously very confused, and Haylin's grandmother tells them to listen with their own heart and the heart of Kanjakar. She describes the elements this way. Water is described as broken and uncontainable. Interesting that the word broken is used. I wonder what implications that has for Irma's character. Earth is described simply as firm, fire as generous and difficult, and air as free and light. Will takes the heart and magic surges through her, and she is described like she is possessed. Cornelia is still in denial and refuses to admit she is afraid. She storms off, but Halen says she'll change her mind. Then she starts talking excitedly about them being superheroes and comes up with the WITCH acronym. The group still is very reluctant though and doesn't officially adopt it just yet. But nobody puts forth any better ideas either. Chapter 13 is only 2 pages long and nothing of substance happens except Halen's grandmother visits the Oracle. In Chapter 14, Will is resentful that she is once again alone in her struggles as the Keeper of the Heart with a different and unexplained power. Elion returns from her date excited for round 2, but is kind of nervous and asks her friends to go with her. Will's worry that her friends would exclude her is eased a bit as she's invited along. Again, this friend group is like so genuine, I love it. So they arrive at the gym in the middle of the night and are ambushed by Cedric and Vethek. During Vethek's monologue, we learn that the veil weakens at the end of every millennium, which makes sense why in the early 2000s all this is going down. Will brings forth the heart from the palm of her hand and triggers the other girl's transformations. This frees Irma and Halen from Vethek's clutches. Halen doesn't change much, but feels more free. Irma's eyes become sultry and mysterious, her lips pouty. She's still 13, she just looks older. Don't like that. The comic epilogue picks up with the start of the gym scene and carries through the entirety of the fight. And the girls manage to get away and close the portal, and the villains are swearing revenge. And Elion is watching mysteriously from behind a tree. All in all, a lot happens in this book, which is why I summarized most of it, because a lot of it is going to come back into play later, and I think they do a really good job of setting up a lot of the main plot points. I don't think there's really much of any, dropped plot threads in here. Everything is set up very nicely. It's clear there was a plan, from early on. I really like this first book, and I've reread this series a bunch of times, and especially this first book a bunch of times. And I'm amazed at how much I still remember of it. I'm really excited to see how this series develops. Now, while there are some kind of really awkward and problematic things, I think, again, as far as the girls' fixation on their own body and development is very in character for middle schoolers and is handled in the way of just this is a relatable thing for teens and not titillation for adults. And I think that's very important to make that distinction. I had trouble with knowing whether things are sexualized in me or not, always have from when I was a kid, and so I'm not the best one to and again, nostalgic rose tinted glasses. So I'm not the best one to say how problematic it is, but I will say it's not so bad that I don't want to continue the series. It's just something that makes me go, whenever I see it. But again, there's so many other parts of the series. It's very relatable, teen girl character stuff. It has a very supportive, positive, wholesome friend group and all the characters have a lot of personality and they're really fun to hang out with. The fantasy elements are also really fun. There's a lot more to this series, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the rest of it.